This video is a combination of all the parts from the All Stormtrooper Types and Variants series for easier viewing. Because we combined 4 parts into one video, the list numbering will reset every now and then. First are the standard Stormtroopers. They were the most common soldiers of the Galactic Empire and served as an ever-present reminder of the absolute power of Emperor Palpatine. They wore all-white armor that was designed to instill fear in the enemy. It protected them from the environment and gave them limited protection from blasters. The standard issue weapon for them was an E-11 blaster rifle. They also each possessed a thermal detonator attached to their lower back. Standard Stormtroopers were usually used to attack the enemy straight on with speed and overwhelming numbers. Second are the Desert Stormtroopers, also known as Sand Troopers. They were equipped with modified armor and equipment to withstand the harsh climates of desert planets like Tatooine. They had additional training in specialized areas and advanced cooling systems in both their helmets and suits that offered them protection from extreme heats. Their armor was also slightly different from the regular Stormtroopers, having a distinctive diamond-shaped left knee plate, non-ribbed chest and back plate connectors, as well as reinforced abdominal plating. They also wore an SD-48 survival backpack. Third are the Cold Assault Stormtroopers, also known as Snow Troopers. They were trained to operate in Arctic climates and wore armor that was specialized to the climate extremes on frozen worlds such as Hoth. To ease breathing in extremely cold atmospheres, a breather hood enveloped the snowtroopers' faceplate and fed into their suit liner. Each trooper was equipped with terrain grip boots, a standard utility belt containing high-tension wire, grappling hooks, ion flares, additional blaster ammunition, a survival kit, and ration packs. The trooper's backpack carried a main heating unit, main power cell, communications unit, and a homing beacon. Fourth are the Incinerator Stormtroopers, also known as Flame Troopers or Incinerator Troopers. They wore Stormtrooper armor with red markings that was exceptionally heat resistant, able to withstand high temperatures. They were equipped with flamethrowers. Imperial Flame Troopers were sent on missions or an example needed to be made. They would march into settlements and burn them to the ground, leaving nothing standing, and would often burn the bystanders alive as well. Fifth are the Zero-Gravity Assault Stormtroopers, also known as Space Troopers. They wore a 2-meter tall set of zero-gravity armor that interfaced with the standard Stormtrooper armor. The suit provided a hermetic seal against the vacuum of space and propulsion that allowed space troopers to move and fight in space for extended periods of time. They were trained to capture enemy vessels intact. The suit allowed them to carry heavy firepower, turning each trooper into the equivalent of a light tank. There was another style of this armor that was lighter and used during the building of the first Death Star. It was basically a standard Stormtrooper armor, vacuum sealed, with a rebreather unit, and a back-mounted jetpack. Sixth are the Aquatic Assault Stormtroopers, also known as Sea Troopers or Aquatic Troopers. They were used by the Galactic Empire to maintain a presence on the many aquatic worlds under its rule. The armor of the Sea Trooper was based on the lightweight Scout Trooper design. It was worn over a 2-piece environmental body glove that provides protection from toxic water environments. The Sea Trooper's armor was pressure sealed to a maximum of 10 atmospheres and included a rebreather that allowed them to stay underwater for more than an hour. Sea Troopers usually had the SG-4 blaster rifle, which was capable of firing miniature harpoons underwater. Seventh are the Imperial Jump Troopers, also known as Sky Troopers or Air Assault Troopers. They were assigned to battlefields with the most treacherous terrain. They wore standard Stormtrooper armor, though their shoulders were black and had patches of red paint on them. Their armor design was similar to the armor worn by Commander Cody. They were equipped with an AJP-400 Hushabout personal jetpack that allowed them to burst through the air in short spurts of about 20 seconds and allowed them to hover in a location for an extended period of time. They were also sometimes seen wearing standard Stormtrooper armor, along with a jetpack. Eighth are the Scout Troopers, also known as Biker Scouts. They were usually used as reconnaissance troops, spies, and survivalists. They were especially excellent marksmen, and thus were regarded as the finest snipers in the service of the Galactic Empire. Their light armor allowed them to be more mobile than a regular Stormtrooper, but offered less protection. They usually used blaster pistols or sniper rifles depending on their assignment. Last for part 1 are the Imperial Shock Troopers. They served as elite frontline forces for the Empire, and also as bodyguards for Emperor Palpatine himself. They wore extra heavy plate armor which provided them great protection from blaster fire. Their armor styles would vary, with red markings being the most distinctive style of the shock troopers. They would usually carry heavy blasters and rocket launchers. In some cases, Imperial shock troopers wore Clone Wars era shock trooper armor. First are the Magma Stormtroopers, also known as Magma Troopers. They were responsible for crushing revolts and other actions on volcanic mining planets such as Mustafar and Sullust. Magma Trooper armor was specially designed to withstand extremely high temperatures, including some direct contact with volcanic magma. Depending on the planet, they sometimes wore red armor as camouflage. They usually carried heavy blasters and flamethrowers. Second are the Riot Stormtroopers, also known as Riot Troopers. They specialized in containing and defusing insurrectionist scenarios on disobedient worlds. They were trained for close combat, and thus were armed with electrostaffs made from lightsaber-resistant cortosis. They were trained alongside of the Imperial Royal Guards and were just as loyal to the Emperor. Third are the Wetland Assault Stormtroopers, also known as Swamp Troopers. They were trained and equipped to operate in forested wetlands and other semi-aquatic environments, such as lakes, rivers, and settlements built on or near waterways. They wore upgraded green armor that allowed for easier operations in humid and poisonous environments. Their armor was tinted green to allow for camouflage in forested wetlands. They were equipped with FC-1 Flechette launchers and also carried rebreathers that allowed them to breathe underwater for a short amount of time. Fourth are the Stormtrooper Grenadiers. They specialized in the use of grenades and were equipped with grenade launchers. They wore a red pauldron and a black bandolier across their chest. Another version of the Stormtrooper Grenadiers wore regular Stormtrooper armor with a backpack that contained several grenades, ammunition, and Bacta products. Instead of a grenade launcher, they were equipped with an SE-14 blaster pistol. Fifth are the Radiation Zone Assault Troopers, also known as Radiation Troopers. They were well equipped to operate in heavy radiation zones and wore silver and black battle armor that protected them from radiation as well as biological and chemical exposure. They were usually equipped with a blaster carbine. Sixth are the Storm Surgeons. They were tasked with performing dangerous medical operations in the field and in combat. They wore a red pauldron. Seventh are the Bomb Squad Stormtroopers, also known as Bomb Troopers. They were trained in the activation and deactivation of explosive charges. Bomb Troopers wore specially modified heavy fire-resistant armor for flame precautions. The armor was strong enough to withstand controlled explosions and high-velocity shrapnel. They wore a long hood that covered their faceplate, and they all wore safety helmets. Eighth are the EVO Troopers, also known as the Environmental Troopers. They were equipped with heavily enhanced armor with breathing tubes, which allowed them to survive and operate in the most hazardous conditions, such as extreme heat, acid rivers, and lightning. Last for part 2 are the Dewback Troopers, also known as Dewback Riders. They specialized in riding dewbacks and were used in destroying lightly defended buildings and defenses, as well as attacking hostile combat vehicles. They were also equipped with a flamethrower. First are the Shadow Stormtroopers, also known as Shadow Troopers or Black Hole Stormtroopers. They wore all black Stormtrooper armor that gave them great protection against blasters, and they carried cloaking devices that rendered them invisible for a short period of time. Shadow Stormtroopers were specially trained in infiltration and ambush tactics, and were often assigned to extremely classified missions. Second are the Shadow Troopers, not to be confused with the Shadow Stormtroopers seen previously. These Shadow Troopers were Stormtrooper Dark Jedi hybrid soldiers. They were armed with lightsabers powered by synthetic Sith crystals. They wore armor made out of cortosis, a mineral that resisted lightsabers. This armor also had limited stealth capabilities. Shadow Troopers possessed some Force abilities, like Force Grip and Force Lightning. Third are the Phase Zero Dark Troopers. These soldiers were aged veteran clones from the Clone Wars, who had their limbs and organs removed and replaced with cybernetics. Many troopers could not cope with the state of being more machine than man, and attempted suicide. Dark Troopers wore a jump pack and typically carried a blaster cannon or ARC caster. Fourth are the Phase 1 Dark Troopers, which were Imperial droids. These droids were little more than a skeletal frame equipped with a vibro sword attached to their right arm and a blast shield on their left. They possessed basic artificial intelligence. Though rarely used in combat, they were mainly used as guards for Imperial installations. Fifth are the Phase 2 Dark Troopers, which were an upgraded version of the Phase 1 Dark Troopers. These droids were equipped with a jump pack and an assault cannon. They were heavily armored and were also capable of being loaded into hyperspace pods for transportation. They could also be used as an exoskeleton for regular soldiers as well. Sixth are the Phase 3 Dark Troopers, which are the last and most powerful Dark Trooper droids. These Dark Troopers were intended to later be made into exoskeletons and become the new armor for the next generation of Stormtroopers. These exoskeletons were supposed to give its wearer increased firepower, strength, and durability. They were armed with a large handheld assault cannon and 2 shoulder-mounted Seeker missile launcher racks that were hidden under the suit's shoulder plates when not in use. They wore extremely powerful armor that was nearly indestructible, even against lightsabers. Seventh are going to be the Dark Trooper class variants. They are very similar and really only differ by name and how they look. These will include the Glory class Dark Troopers, Triumphant class Dark Troopers, Exogen class Dark Troopers, Victory class Dark Troopers, Oppressor 7 class Dark Troopers, Oppressor 9 class Dark Troopers, Black Hole Dark Troopers, Urban Assault Dark Troopers, and Inquisitorium Dark Troopers. They were primarily used as city guards and relied on a wide variety of weapons, like the E11 blaster and the EE3 carbine rifles, and DXR-6 heavy carbines. They were typically droids, with a few of them being cyborgs. They were heavily armored. The Glory-class Dark Troopers were one of the most feared troopers by the rebels, and the Inquisitorium Dark Troopers primarily worked with the Inquisitors branch. Eighth are the Dark Troopers, not to be confused with the Phase 0 through 3 Dark Troopers, or the class variant Dark Troopers seen previously. These Dark Troopers were specially trained Stormtroopers empowered with the dark side of the Force. They wore black armor, and not much else is known about them. Ninth are the Night Hunters. They were personally trained by Sith Lords and learned to defend themselves against Jedi Force powers. They were able to block lightsaber attacks, negate the effects of Force powers, and counter the extreme athleticism of Jedi. Night Hunters were usually sent to kill or capture Jedi. 10th are the Nova Troopers. Nova Troopers were Stormtrooper honor guards. They wore distinctive black and gold reinforced Stormtrooper armor. They were assigned to either historically significant locations, such as the Sith burial grounds, or to guard captured enemy starships. They were also used as commandos in special missions, such as infiltrating enemy bases. 11th are the Dark Nova Troopers. They were droids and were programmed with expertise in boarding operations against enemy ships, and as such were commonly used to board Rebel Alliance corvettes. They were heavily armored and were armed with heavily modified DC-15A blaster rifles. 12th are the Purge Troopers. They wore a heavy suit of armor similar to that of the Phase 2 Dark Troopers. They were used to enforce the Empire's rule in the Anot sector on behalf of Governor Adelhard. Another version of the Purge Troopers was an early design of the Imperial Dark Trooper project. They were meant to be used against Force sensitives. Their primary weapon was an energy blade extending from their left forearm, along with a shield to block attacks. They also possessed a missile launcher on their right shoulder. They wore armor that was made out of duranium and cortosis, which gave them great protection against lightsabers. 13th are the Terror Troopers. The Terror Troopers were created as cyborg experiments. Their masks were designed to invoke the appearance of General Grievous from the Clone Wars. They possessed a stun blaster and a cloaking ability. They had extremely fast reflexes, which allowed them to dodge most melee attacks. Terror Troopers were usually sent into hostile environments in order to quickly dispose of targets without leaving a trace. 14th are the Shadow EVO Troopers. They wore an experimental armor which mixed the elements from both the EVO Trooper armor and the Shadow Trooper armor. This allowed them to operate in the most hazardous environments, while also having the ability to turn invisible. Although they were rarely used, they were usually sent on operations on worlds which involved menacing the local inhabitants and assassinating resistance leaders. Last for part 3 are the Hazard Stormtroopers, also known as Hazard Troopers. They wore a very heavy suit of body armor that offered complete immunity to temperature extremes, immunity to acidic damage, as well as invulnerability to small firearms. The armor was also a functioning spacesuit, which could keep the wearer alive in a vacuum or underwater environment for up to 3 days. Their armor had limited protection to lightsabers as well. Hazard Stormtroopers, like Phase Zero Dark Troopers, were cyborgs. They were usually equipped with either an Imperial Heavy Repeater or a Stuker concussion rifle. First is the Imperial Commandos Special Unit. This unit was comprised of clones and was one of the most elite units in the Imperial military. They were mainly used for hunting down surviving Jedi and clone deserters. Their armor provided far better protection than regular Stormtrooper armor, including special features like deflector shields. They were usually equipped with a DC-17M rifle. Second are the Storm Commandos, also known as Imperial Commandos or Shadow Scouts. Storm Commandos were tasked to instigate uprisings on enemy systems and to subdue insurrections on Imperial-held worlds. They relied on stealth over brute force during their operations. Their armor was based on the Scout Troopers' light armor and was usually black. They carried a cloaking device that allowed them to turn invisible. They sometimes wore Shock Trooper armor when protection was valued over mobility. They were usually equipped with an E-11 blaster and used flamethrowers if the situation required it. Third are the Imperial Navy Commandos. They were lightly armored soldiers and were trained for patrol, guard, and monitor duties. Their armor was sort of like a combination of regular Stormtrooper armor, Snowtrooper armor, and Scout Trooper armor. Their primary weapon was the E-11 blaster rifle. Fourth are their Imperial Marines. They were primarily stationed on Imperial naval warships and Star Destroyers. They utilized cutting lasers and explosive charges to breach enemy vessels and were generally the first to board on captured starships. Their primary weapon included an E-11 blaster rifle and a Mini-Mag PTL missile launcher. Fifth are the Heavy Stormtroopers, also known as Heavy Weapon Stormtroopers. They wore slightly better armor than the regular Stormtroopers and were armed with rapid-fire blasters. The weight of their armor and the blaster limited their mobility. Sixth are the Imperial Heavy Troopers, not to be confused with the Heavy Stormtroopers previously. These soldiers were large warriors that were trained for melee combat. They were highly trained and were capable of killing even a Force user at close combat. Their armor provided limited protection from lightsabers, and their weapon of choice was an electrostaff. Seventh are the Field Stormtroopers, also known as Field Troopers. They were higher-ranking Stormtroopers with superior field experience and weaponry. They were recognizable by their multicolored pauldrons, which related to what their expertise was. Orange pauldrons were equipped with an E-11 blaster rifle. Yellow pauldrons were equipped with rail detonators, and red pauldrons were equipped with an Imperial repeater rifle. Eighth are the Stormtrooper Commanders. They were regarded as the Empire's best soldiers and had command over most of the other soldiers, even Shadow Troopers. They wore upgraded armor that had blue markings, and they were equipped with blaster cannons. Ninth are the Armored Stormtroopers. They were distinguishable by their heavy armor, orange shoulder pads, and red monocle-like device on their right eye. They were also known to utilize heavy weapons. 10th are the Clone Stormtroopers. They were Jango Fett clones from the Clone Wars who became the very first Stormtroopers. Although they possessed the same armor and weapons as regular human Stormtroopers, they typically performed better than them due to their superior training and vast experience from the Clone Wars. They would slowly be replaced by regular human Stormtroopers and would end up being a small minority in the Imperial military in later years of the Galactic Empire. 11th are the Imperial Coruscant Guards. They had similar duties to the previous Republic Coruscant Guards, which included protecting the government buildings and policing the Senate District. They wore distinctive crimson-red heavy armor that protected them from a majority of weapons they expected to encounter. Their helmets also allowed them to see in complete darkness. 12th are the Storm Snipers, also known as Stormtrooper Snipers. They specialized in the use of long-range weapons, especially snipers. They wore a blue pauldron and sometimes had a black bandolier strapped across their chest plate. 13th are the Sniper Troopers, not to be confused with the Storm Snipers seen previously. Sniper Troopers were trained to effectively use the E-11S sniper rifle and wore gray Scout Trooper armor. 14th are the Crowd Control Stormtroopers. They specialized in suppressing crowds and crushing uprisings. Their crowd control equipment allowed them to easily fend off large crowds. They were also equipped with a thruster pack, which mounted a heavy blaster module, a capture claw, and a supercharged taser. 15th are the Death Troopers. These troopers were undead stormtroopers accidentally created by an Imperial biological weapon codenamed Blackwing. They possessed only primitive feral instincts but were able to communicate and learn from one another through what seemed like unintelligible screeching. Despite being zombies, they were still able to use weapons and perform tasks they possessed before they turned into zombies. Last for Part 4 are the Guardsmen Stormtroopers, also known as the Emperor's Royal Guard, wearing Stormtrooper armor. They were used for field operations that required special combat armor. This armor was vastly better than regular Stormtrooper armor. Because they were part of the Royal Guard, these soldiers had excellent training in combat. Thanks for watching the last part of this series. We will be doing a similar series for clone troopers and other Star Wars factions, as well as go over other Imperial branches like the Imperial Navy branch. I hope you guys enjoyed this series, and let us know in the comments what other factions you want us to do similar series on. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this one. And as always, may the Force be with you.